if I don't buy it now, it shall be gone forever, and I will have lost my chance.
You know what? Hey, I'm Stephanie, and I purchased more makeup than I was planning to this summer. So today I'm going to try to unpack why, but I'm also going to discuss a reason I've discovered as to why taking a slow approach to consumption can actually be incredibly satisfying, despite my behavior to the contrary. Welcome to my Adagio Beauty update, where I discuss the struggles, but also the triumphs of trying to find the balance between desire and common sense, in my case, in the context of cosmetics. If you're new here, I call it Adagio Beauty instead of slow beauty because Adagio is a musical, fun way of saying slow, and it's much more representative of my attitude towards consumption. I focus much more on abundance than on abstinence. Because when I choose to purchase less, that means that I have more time to truly luxuriate in the lovely things I already have. And that is what this journey is really about for me, slowing down the tempo so that I can focus more on appreciation than acquisition. I'm not against acquisition, it's just that I've learned that I want to be more selective in what I own so that I have more time to truly appreciate the things I do choose to acquire. At this point, you might be asking yourself, okay, that's all fine and good, but weren't you just talking about how you purchased too much makeup this summer? And the answer is yes. Yes, I did. So what happened? Well, I blame my mother. It was all her fault. No, I'm just kidding. But I have a feeling that hanging out with her probably didn't help. I was traveling a good part of the summer, and part of my travels took me to the US where I got to visit family. And we did lots of fun stuff, including, amongst other things, shopping. And I have to say, when I look back at how often we were browsing in various makeup shops and department stores, I was much better than I used to be in the past because the great majority of times that we were out, I didn't purchase anything at all. So that means I have definitely made progress because I have learned how to enjoy the process of browsing without it resulting in a purchase. And I think that it's good to acknowledge that progress. But I did end up buying 6 things over the course of 3 months, which is twice as much as I had originally planned to do. And since downsizing my makeup is one of my main goals this year, the decisions I made this past summer weren't really in line with my overarching goals I set for myself. But as I always say at the end of my videos, even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style. And the best way for me to move forward positively and make decisions in future that are more in line with my own priorities is to take a deeper look at the decisions I made this past summer. Let's begin by taking a look at what I actually planned on purchasing and examine if those decisions were in fact worth it. Beginning with 1 eyeshadow palette and 1 quad. These 2 have both been on my wish list since their respective releases, but I told myself I was not allowed to purchase another eyeshadow palette until I went through my little shoebox of eyeshadow palettes that I had used the least in 2022, because I wanted to decide which ones I really wanted to keep or which ones I wanted to give away so that they could get the love they deserved. And since I completed that task before my trip, I told myself I could splurge and get these 2. I know that the makeup community is currently feeling pretty humdrum towards Pat McGrath, especially because her most recent Mothership palettes all seem to look like each other. And I'm not going to deny that, it's true, but I also think it's because several of the things that used to make Pat McGrath feel a little bit special as a brand have been watered down as of late through things like really horrible shipping times, but also some strange creative choices and sometimes cheap looking or cheap feeling packaging. I get it. But I cannot deny that I have been tempted by this Mothership 10 palette ever since it came out last year during my no-buy year. And I feel like every time I have watched a beauty influencer on YouTube and really thought, that eyeshadow that they're wearing, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And then I went and I checked their description box to see what they were wearing. 8 times out of 10, this was what was on their eyes. And so I thought maybe that's a sign that this palette is just for me. So I decided I was going to buy it when I found it on a good sale, but I wanted to swatch it in person first. So one of my missions this summer was to go see this palette in real life. And I went on several different occasions and swatched it. Every single time I really thought, yeah, I do think this is what I'm looking for. So when Pat had one of her summer sales, that's when I picked this up. And I have to say, this just got to me. So that's how bad shipping was. So I've only got to play with it a handful of times, but so far this color story has not disappointed. I do know that several people were very disappointed that these 4 special shades aren't in her typical Blitz Astral textured formula, but they still feel really special to me. I think the most important thing when evaluating whether or not this palette was a smart purchase within the context of how I want to curate my collection is, did it meet my expectations? Does it do what I was hoping it would do? And I think the answer is yes, because I was looking for a cool toned palette that wasn't too cool toned. And I think this hits a nice balance. You've got some icy blues. This champagne is relatively icy up here, but at the same time, you have a couple of shades with warmth in the undertones. And so I think that that balances it out well. Another thing I've been looking for is platinum, gold, and champagne shiny shades that are bright enough to bring some light to my deep set eyes without being too brightening, that are really sparkly, but that don't lean too warm. And I think that there's at least 3 shades in this palette, if not 4, that can help me achieve that goal. So that's good. But I think the most important thing of all is that I can realistically see myself getting a ton of use out of every single one of the shades in this palette. So for me, I think this was a wise purchase. My other planned palette purchase was this Tom Ford Forbidden Pink Quad. And the reason I was curious about this one is because I had received a quad in this formula for Christmas. It was the Rose Topaz palette. And this formula quickly became one of my favorites. But I would often reach for this palette to create a look and then realize in the process that it was just a little bit too cool toned for what I was looking for that day. And so I was like, oh, it'd be great if I could have this formula in some warm tones. So I was eyeing Tom Ford's Tiger Eye quad for a while, but I haven't been able to see that one in person yet for some reason. And I'm worried that the tones in that palette might pull a little bit too coppery on me, because those kinds of colors often pull weirdly copper on my eyes, on my skin tone. Then Tom Ford released the Forbidden Pink Quad as a limited edition palette for Valentine's Day. And I thought to myself, aha! This one leans warm pink, and it does have a copper tone, but it's not going to go weirdly copper on my eyes because it's pink. I was a little bit hesitant because I wasn't able to see this one in person either. And this was before my pink curious phase, which if you've been watching my Panning for Gold series, you'll know that like now I'm really into pink, but that wasn't always the case. Back when this came out, the way people were describing it made it sound like it was right up my alley, because the comment I heard most about this palette was, the pink is so forbidden that they couldn't even put it in the palette. And I mean, if at first glance, there's no pink in here. There's a brown, there's a mauve, there's a taupe, there's a copper, but there's no pink in here. However, upon beholding it with my own eyes, I can tell you that this brown is a rosy brown, this is a rosy mauve, and this copper leans rose. I'd say it's like a metallic rose. Tom hid that forbidden pink in the undertones, which I consider a genius move, because finally there's a copper that doesn't lean weirdly orange on me. If I'm being honest, this planned purchase was initially a huge disappointment because I was used to using the Rose Topaz palette, and this one is quite pigmented, which to be honest can also be tricky because, for example, this shade, I have to be very careful with it because I might be going for a very easygoing day look, and if I don't pay attention for a second, it can instantly become like the smokiest eye ever, like so smoky that it's setting off fire alarms. Like this shade is a real doozy. And I thought that this was going to have the same pigmentation, and I hadn't seen these next to each other yet, and I assumed that this had the same depth, but this one is a little bit lighter. Maybe you can see if I hold it like this. It's a little bit lighter, but also it's not as pigmented. So when I used this shadow initially, I was like, wow, that's not very impactful. It turns out, though, that has actually become a huge advantage because I can be super distracted or careless or in a hurry, and I can never overdo the smokiness. Like if I want to make a smoky eye, I can, but I have to actually want to. I'm never going to accidentally set off fire alarms using this palette, which is nice. One thing I've learned about this formula is that it takes time to become one with the skin. When I initially apply this, every single time, it just looks very lackluster and I'm unimpressed. But about 10 minutes later, it just starts to develop its own shine. I mean, it doesn't become like, a metallic disco ball of a color, but it does have a very beautiful and unique kind of textural shimmer to it that's very, very classy. So I've come to realize that although I'm not a fan of it on initial application, 10 minutes later, it's already coming into its own. So I really enjoy that. But what I have learned about this copper shade is that it's not the ideal depth. It's a great tone, but it's a little bit too dark for my deep set eyes. And so I can use it for a great evening look, but during the day, I only ever really use this in my outer corner. The rosy taupe shade is quite sparkly. After all, it's kind of a topper shade. But I find that this brings light to the eyes through sparkle, but not color. This shade is also a little bit dark for my personal skin tone and face shape and preferences. But it is a topper, which means the base is translucent. And I have found that if I want to add a beautiful lightening sparkle to my eyes during the day, all I have to do is use a brightening base. For example, my MAC Paint Pot in soft ochre. And when I do that, lay that base down to brighten up my eyelid and then put this on top of it, then the combination of the brightening from my base and the sparkle from the shadow, I think really do something nice. And that's what I'm wearing on my eyes today. I just put MAC soft ochre all over my lids, and then I applied this on top of it. And I feel like that is a great day look. So was this a smart purchase for me? I was initially very disappointed with the lack of a range of depth in this quad, but to be honest, that's a problem with a lot of Tom Ford quads. For some reason, he just loves putting 4 light shades or 4 mid-tone shades or 4 dark shades into a quad. And I just feel like that choice makes them so much less versatile. But if I look at my past purchasing behavior, I know that I'm usually pretty good about checking that. And I avoid those palettes if I don't think that they're going to have enough versatility for me. And this time around, I don't know. I just missed it. And I don't even know why. I think maybe it was because I was intrigued at the fact that I could maybe have a copper shade that doesn't turn orange on me. I was intrigued by the color story and the way people were talking about it, but I also was enamored with the idea of having another palette in this formula. Ultimately, I found a way to work with this palette that combats the lacking range of depth in here, and that saves it for me. But also, I feel like my Adagio Beauty mindset saved it for me because I had the time to really experiment with this and see how it worked best for me. And the great thing about it is that I found a very simple solution. It doesn't even add an extra step to my makeup routine because I always use an eyeshadow primer anyway. I just had to figure out which one would work best, and I had to take the time to really see how the colors could work best to suit my eye shape. And my last planned makeup purchase of the summer was this Urban Decay 24/7 eyeliner in the shade Stash, which was just a repurchase. So kind of boring in comparison, but I'm very glad to have it back in my collection. But this order is where my unplanned purchases began, because when I purchased this, I also purchased it in another color. I don't know what's happening to me. It's like I started getting interested in pink, and then all of a sudden I started wanting to wear other colors too, like blues and greens, thus the teal eyeliner. Because when I do a colorful eye look, notice the air quotes when I say colorful, because I am fully aware that there are people on this earth like Angelica Nyqvist who would probably laugh out loud at my definition of colorful. By the way, I don't think that Angie would laugh at anybody for something as silly as eyeshadow, because she at least seems to be a genuinely cool person. But you know what I mean. When I do a colorful eye look, I basically just contour my eyes using browns and beiges and maybe some bronzes, or in more recent times, some pinky tones. But then I'll go and spice things up by adding a colorful eyeliner. Did I need this? No. Should I have bought this? In the context of my goal of trying to declutter or downsize my makeup collection, also no. But Am I using it and enjoying it? Yes. And I do think that that's ultimately the most important thing. But had I been in a more analytical frame of mind when I purchased this, then I probably would have just thought to myself, I have some colorful eyeshadows. I could try just using those as eyeliner instead of purchasing a separate product. Continuing with the theme of unplanned purchases, this next surprise goodie is green. I know. Who am I? I don't even know anymore. If things keep going in this direction, you're going to have to start calling me Rainbow Brite. See the shining light. The sun's going to take you to Rainbow Brite. Starlight flies right before your eyes, and rainbow colors will cheer you up. But I digress. Back to Tom Ford. I kind of feel like Tom Ford and Rainbow Brite are like at opposite ends of the elegance spectrum. And if I'm being honest with myself, I think I'm closer to Rainbow Brite than Tom Ford. So behold, my fantasy self. Anyway, I think this Velours Kaki palette was Tom Ford's holiday 2022 release. So it came out during my no-buy year. It's a limited edition. I just assumed I was never going to get my hands on this. But truth be told, even if this hadn't come out during my no-buy year, this is not a palette I ever would have purchased sight unseen because I'm very particular about greens. And if it has the wrong undertones, I just know I'm not going to wear it. So this is the sort of thing I know no matter what I would have had to see in person. But my mom and I were strolling through Nordstrom's and they unexpectedly had this holiday palette still on display the following summer. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's there. I'm going to swatch it. And that was my downfall because, these tones, they are what I was looking for. I even put them on my eyes and my mom was like,
Oh my gosh, it's so you. You have to get it.
that's not what she sounds like at all, but that's essentially what she said. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get it. But then the SA was like,
Oh, I'm sorry, we don't carry that palette anymore.
and I was sad. But as we can plainly see, the story didn't end there because I was waiting for a sale to order the Forbidden Pink palette. And once said sale began, I went online, I put this in my basket, and then all of a sudden I saw they still had this palette in stock, and oh my gosh, it is also on sale. And so I just add to cart, gone. It was in my cart. I had paid for it. I didn't even know what happened. I blacked out. It was instant. And that, my friends, is, I think, the definition of an impulse purchase. But now, with distance, in a moment of clarity, looking back at that moment in a more analytical frame of mind, I don't think that decision was necessarily wise if you look at just the sole goal of me trying to downsize my collection, but I don't regret it because one of the things I am trying to do with my collection is make it exactly what I want it to be. And I know my purchasing history. I have, over the course of my makeup lifetime, purchased several olive-toned eyeshadows or palettes. For example, Samantha Ravndal's brand Auric makes the Smoke Reflect shades. I think I purchased that one in the shade Entice, hoping to get this effect. And unfortunately, that was just the wrong undertone. It was a beautiful quality shadow. I was just never wearing it because I just didn't like the undertone. And so I ended up decluttering it, just like all of my other olive-toned eyeshadows. But this one also has beautiful quality, but it's exactly the shade that I wanted. So was it wise in the context of trying to curate the ideal shades for me? Yes, I actually think this ended up being a happy stumble. Do I think it's something I should repeat frequently? No, but I did luck out with this one. My last unplanned purchase was this matte fluid eye paint from About Face. If you saw my videos over the past several weeks, you'll know that I was traveling and I mentioned several times that I did an atrocious job of packing for this trip because the 2 weeks leading up to it were just so hectic. Even up to the night before, I was playing a show. I got home at like midnight, maybe 1 a.m, and that's when I started packing. So I just forgot a bunch of stuff like, powder bronzer, powder blush, my primer, my MAC paint pot. I think that was probably the most painful thing that I forgot. But I decided that I didn't want to repurchase things for this trip just because, number one, I could get by with what I brought with me. But number two, purchasing items that I needed while traveling, that was one of the reasons I got to have such an overwhelming makeup collection in the first place. I mean, sometimes in the past, it was necessary for me to repurchase things when I was on tour, because if my luggage got lost or delayed, I was still expected to show up on stage fully clothed, including with a full face of makeup. But this trip, I was able to get by with what I had brought, and so I decided I was gonna get by with what I had. And yet, I purchased a liquid eyeshadow, namely in this shade, Smell Before Rain. I didn't need this. I had 2 perfectly functioning liquid eyeshadows at home. I just was so curious about the formula and the color because I've heard so many people talk about this. So I used my poor forgotten paint pot at home as an excuse to buy this, because Temptalia described this shade as, and I quote, a moderately warm-toned medium beige with a matte finish. So I was hoping this might actually be a great replacement for my aging MAC paint pot, especially because as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that lighter weight formulas are better for my eyelids, and a lot of times liquids are a little bit lighter weight than creams. And so I was like, well, if this works, then maybe I can upgrade. Unfortunately, this is not beige, at least not on me. This is definitely a grayish, which is not a bad color. It's just not what I was looking for. But I have to say, the formula is a dream. Like, the hype behind this, I think, is real, because this has great staying power, even on my oily, deep-set hooded eyelids that eat eyeshadow for breakfast. And that, I think, is a huge testament to this. So I have been using it as a one-and-done shadow. I've used it as a base for toppers. It's just that grayish is not the base color that I was searching for right now. Had I been able to swatch this in a store, I would have known that, and I wouldn't have even been tempted to purchase it. But I just had such high hopes that this was going to be beige instead of grayish. Out of all of the unplanned purchases I made this summer, I would have to say that these 2 were the most stumbly, because when it comes to this one, it serves the same purpose as my Ulta Beauty matte cream eyeshadow in the shade Vintage Beauty. They're not dupes for each other. They're not the same color, but they do serve the same purpose within my collection. So I definitely didn't need both of them. And when it comes to this teal eyeliner, I really do enjoy this formula. I like the fact that it has blendability, but then it sets down and has real staying power. And I like that I can use it in the waterline. But I could get the same effect by just using some of my powder eyeshadows. And I realized I couldn't use these in the waterline and I wouldn't get the exact same color. But really, I could do the same kind of thing. This purchase, though, I do feel like is less disastrous because I really do enjoy this gel formula. I think the most frustrating part of this purchase for me was the fact that it is a liquid product, which means it's going to expire faster than, like, say, a powder product would, which means I'm going to have to do a heck of a lot of eye looks with these if I'm going to use the product up. Before we sum things up to look at the lessons learned, I do want to mention one more purchase, although this one is actually from the spring. It's just that I forgot to mention it in that video. I even had it on the table next to me, and I don't know if the footage just got lost or what, because I do remember talking about it. It just wasn't in the footage anymore. So I'm mentioning it now. This is the Charlotte Tilbury Magic Vanish Color Corrector. And the reason that I purchased this to test, even though I have other color correctors, is because my main goal when it comes to the aesthetics and the look and what I'm trying to figure out this year is how to optimize my under eyes. And I had seen Too Much Tash here on YouTube do a video comparing color correctors. And the way she talked about this one really made it sound like this was going to be my Goldilocks color corrector. So I decided to risk it, and I did purchase this spring. It is still currently in testing in my Panning for Gold series, but without saying too much, I will say Natasha did not do me wrong. I am going to link her video below because if you happen to be looking for a color corrector, that video is a great reference. So was my purchase of another under eye corrector Adagio? If I had a strictly utilitarian approach to makeup, then I would probably say no, simply because I do have a couple of functional under eye correctors. They're not ideal, they have their flaws, but they do work, and they work pretty well. So at that level, I would say no, it's not practical for me to add yet another one to my collection. But I do makeup as a hobby. This is a journey that I'm on this year. It's like the journey of the under eye, the year of the under eye for me. And I have been optimizing the way I take care of my under eyes, so my skincare. Also, I've been experimenting with different application methods, and I felt like I had maxed out those possibilities. And even though the correctors I had worked better that way, they still weren't quite exactly what I was looking for. And thanks to Too Much Tosh's video, I thought I had enough information to make an educated guess about this one. And so I do think that this one squeaks in under the finish line, and in my context is Adagio, just because my overarching makeup goal this year is to master the under eye, and I do feel like this had the potential to help me do that. So after taking a look at my makeup purchases from the past quarter, what have I learned? The first thing is that the anti-purchasing muscles from my no-buy year are still relatively strong, especially when I look at the temptations I was faced with this summer. If you've been following me, you already know that friends lent me some very beautiful makeup to test and review this summer, and I will link those reviews below in case you missed them. But despite the fact that I thought the makeup was beautiful and covetable, I didn't purchase any of it for myself because I used my powers of logic to deduce that it just wasn't the right time for me to make a purchase like that. And when I look at how often I was in a Sephora or an Ulta or a department store and I didn't buy anything, my powers of resisting are just very strong, and I'm very happy about that. But oh my gosh, is my wish list long. It grew so much this summer. But that brings me to my second point. My wish listing habit is still going strong. Although I did make 3 impulse purchases this summer, they weren't true impulse buys in the sense that I saw something brand new and just bought it on a whim. All 3 of these items had been on my wish list for months, if not years. The Tom Ford Kaki palette was on my list in the sense of I need to see it first, but if it is what I think it is, then I want it. It's a very bad list name, but it's just a working title. Then the 24/7 eyeliner from Urban Decay, that's been on my wish list for years. And the About Face eyeshadow had also been on my wish list ever since it came out. And I do think that the fact that they were well considered, like I had thought about them before I even put them on my wish list. Like I weighed whether or not I thought they would be useful to me. And that's why they were on my wish list in the first place. And so I think that's why those purchases, even though they were unnecessary, I do feel like they fit me and they fit my makeup taste well because at least they were considered. But I have to say, when it comes to the eyeliner and the liquid shadow purchase, had I not been overly impulsive and just thrown them into my cart, I still would be just as happy without them, if I'm being honest. Which brings me to my third point. Although my impulse control has improved, it is still far from perfect. So what triggered these impulse purchases? Well, in the case of the eyeliner and the liquid eyeshadow, I put them in my shopping cart because I wanted to meet the free shipping threshold. The oldest trick in the book. I know. And I have been so good for not falling for that for so long. But boy, did I fall hard for it this summer. In fact, I didn't just fall for it. I used it to justify unnecessary purchases. But I also think I fell for it because I was in my shopping mode. Anybody who's ever been shopping with me knows that I am a shopping machine. I get into this mode where I'm like scanning the aisles and I'm like swatching, analyzing, classifying, theorizing, justifying. And it's like I get into that mode and I'm just like, bye, 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 bye. And I just need to realize I'm in that mode and shut the machine down again before I get up to the cash register, or in this case, the online shopping cart. In the case of the Tom Ford quad, it was that whole limited edition thing. And I hate that. I don't ever purchase things because they're limited edition. I'm not like, oh, it's so exclusive. I need to be the only one who has it. I couldn't care less about that. If I buy limited edition things, I buy them in spite of the fact that they're limited edition. And with this one, I just thought,
Finally, the ideal olive eyeshadow. And if I don't buy it now, it shall be gone forever, and I will have lost my chance.
you know what? It's colored dirt. Very expensive colored dirt. And I am sure, had I passed on this, I would simply have continued my quest for the perfect olive eyeshadow. And you know what? I would have enjoyed it. There's something to be said for the thrill of the chase. So going forward, I want to try to become more aware of when my inner shopping robot mode gets turned on, but also when that limited edition scarcity mindset gets in the way of the goals that I have set for myself and for my collection. But also, I want to keep in mind that part of this whole Adagio Beauty journey is the yearning itself. Every single time I went into a Sephora or an Ulta or a department store and I didn't purchase anything, it felt so good for 3 reasons. 1, I wasn't overspending or overpurchasing. Number 2, I wasn't overwhelming myself with new things, so I had time to enjoy the few new things I bought. And 3rd, and this is the most surprising one to me, but I get to continue yearning for those beautiful sparkly jewels I left behind. It's almost aspirational. It's like, if I can use up enough of what I have, then someday I'll be able to get a brand new gold nugget. And I like that because not only does it give me something to look forward to, but in the meantime, I have so many beautiful gold nuggets to play with. And I have to remember the fact that sometimes, no, often, I enjoy the anticipation of the thing more than the thing itself. Case in point, the Tom Ford Forbidden Pink Eye Quad. Yes, it's beautiful, and I will have a ton of fun using this. But it was much more versatile in my mind's eye than it is in reality. If you found this deep dive into my dark decisions helpful or entertaining, I hope you'll consider subscribing, liking, commenting, all that jazz. But even if you don't, I hope you have a great week and that we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.